We are armed with more psychological vocabulary than any generation in human history, yet we have never been more profoundly alone. Cut them off. You do not owe anyone your peace. If they disrupt your energy, they are toxic. Protect your space at all costs. These are the mantras of the modern age, delivered in rapid-fire succession by thousands of internet experts staring confidently into their front-facing cameras. They offer a seductive, sterilized solution to the agonizing friction of human relationships. Just draw a boundary. Just walk away. Sarah, please, it's Mom. I don't understand what happened. We haven't seen the baby in 3 months. Your father is sick with worry. Did we do something wrong? Please, sweetie, please just tell us what we did. Just call me back. Sarah did not call back. She listened to the agonizing confusion cracking her mother's voice, felt a momentary twist of guilt in her stomach, and then swiped left. Delete. Block. She looked across the dimly lit nursery at her 3-week-old daughter, sleeping peacefully in her bassinet. Sarah took a deep, shaky breath, her chest swelling with a fierce, protective pride. She had done it. She had finally established a boundary. Sarah is not an anomaly. She is a foot soldier in a silent, massive revolution happening in living rooms and nurseries across the globe. We are witnessing an epidemic of estrangement. Highly invested, deeply caring new parents are severing ties with their own families at a staggering, unprecedented rate. They are not walking away because of severe, unforgivable abuse. They are walking away because of a messy comment. An outdated piece of parenting advice. An overbearing mother-in-law who doesn't quite understand the rules of a modern household. We have taken the nuanced, carefully calibrated language of clinical psychology and turned it into a weapon of mass relational destruction. Words that were designed by therapists to heal deep trauma are now being casually hurled across kitchen tables to shut down ordinary friction. It is easier to diagnose someone than to understand them. It is easier to build a wall than to negotiate a compromise. We no longer have mere disagreements, we are being gaslit. Our parents aren't flawed, aging humans struggling to relate to a rapidly changing world, they are narcissists. Their clumsy, overbearing attempts to help aren't just annoying, they are toxic. When you bring a new life into the world, your protective instincts operate on a hair trigger. Every boundary feels like a matter of life and death. The internet capitalizes on this vulnerability, handing new parents a loaded gun disguised as self-care. It tells you that any relational discomfort is a direct threat to your mental health. It tells you that cutting ties is the ultimate act of empowerment. For Sarah, the breaking point wasn't a shouting match or a profound betrayal. It was a tense conversation about sleep training and a passive-aggressive text message from her mother. Instead of engaging in the agonizing, deeply uncomfortable work of conflict resolution, Sarah diagnosed her. Emotionally immature. Borderline toxic. In the span of a single afternoon, 30 years of family history were flattened into a buzzword, sterilized, and discarded. She had successfully eliminated the discomfort from her life, armed with the clinical vocabulary of 1,000 viral videos. But what happens when the very words meant to protect us become the weapons that destroy our only village? For Sarah, the answer arrived at 3 a.m. with a screaming newborn, an empty house, and a terrifying realization. In the immediate aftermath of the block, there is a profound, almost intoxicating rush of adrenaline. For the first time since bringing her daughter home from the hospital, Sarah felt a radical sense of control. The constant pinging of her phone stopped. The looming anxiety of weekend visits vanished. There were no more unsolicited interrogations about why the baby wasn't wearing socks, or thinly veiled critiques of her feeding schedule. There was only silence, and in that silence, an overwhelming illusion of peace. To understand why Sarah made this choice, you have to understand the seductive power of therapy speak. We are desperate for simple answers to the maddening complexity of family dynamics. Human relationships, especially those bridging massive generational gaps, are a breeding ground for friction. Your parents raised you in an entirely different era, under an entirely different set of cultural rules. When they impose their outdated maps onto your modern territory, it does not just feel annoying. To an exhausted, hormonally depleted new parent, it feels like a fundamental invalidation of your identity. Navigating that friction requires a tremendous amount of emotional labor. It demands the patience to say that you know they love you and want to help, but you are doing things differently now. It requires the emotional endurance to tolerate a temporary, agonizingly awkward tension. But the internet offers a shortcut. A psychological loophole. Instead of doing the grueling work of untangling decades of deeply ingrained family habits, we simply pathologize them. We take the messy, deeply flawed reality of two generations colliding and we sanitize it. A mother who struggles to relinquish her maternal authority is no longer a human being grappling with a shifting identity. She is a narcissist. A father who uses sarcasm because he lacks the emotional vocabulary to express genuine worry is no longer a product of his time. He is emotionally abusive. Any disagreement that causes discomfort is instantly classified as gaslighting. We flatten 30 years of love, sacrifice, and shared history into a single, devastating buzzword: toxic. It is the perfect defense mechanism. If you label your family as clinically toxic, you are instantly absolved of all relational responsibility. You do not have to look in the mirror. You do not have to compromise. You do not have to engage in the deeply uncomfortable act of holding a firm but loving limit. You simply drop a psychological bomb on the relationship and label the fallout as self-care. For the first few weeks, it worked flawlessly. Sarah felt like the fierce, ultimate protector of her newborn's peace. She curated her environment with the ruthless precision of a social media algorithm blocking spam. Her home was a sanctuary of gentle parenting and evidence-based routines, entirely free from the contamination of outdated opinions. She had built an impenetrable psychological fortress around her new family. No unwanted advice could get in. No passive-aggressive comments could reach them. But as the adrenaline of the cutoff faded, she discovered the fatal flaw in her perfect defense system. The real threat wasn't outside the walls at all. The silence of a perfectly curated life is deafening. The real threat to Sarah's new family wasn't the outdated advice of her mother or the clumsy commentary of her father. The real threat was the brutal, unyielding arithmetic of raising a human being in absolute isolation. Month 4 arrived. The sleep regression hit. And the adrenaline finally ran out. For the first time in human history, we are attempting to raise children entirely alone. For hundreds of thousands of years, the burden of infant care was distributed across a vast, interconnected network of grandparents, aunts, neighbors, and extended kin. It was never meant to be a two-person job. It was certainly never meant to be a one-person job. When Sarah's husband returned to work, the psychological fortress she had so proudly constructed suddenly felt like a solitary confinement cell. There were no morning drop-offs so she could catch up on an hour of desperate sleep. There was no one to hold a screaming, colicky baby while she took a 10-minute shower. There were no spontaneous date nights to reconnect with her husband. There was only the grind. The relentless, suffocating loop of feeding, soothing, washing, and weeping. She would walk through the local park, pushing a stroller with heavy, exhausted arms, and watch the very dynamic she had so ruthlessly cut out of her life. She saw mothers sitting on park benches, drinking hot coffee and staring blankly into the distance, while a grandmother chased a toddler across the grass. She saw the compromises. She saw a grandfather hand a child a sugary snack right before dinner, the exact kind of boundary violation that would have sent Sarah spiraling into a rage just months ago. But as she watched that mother simply shrug, close her eyes, and enjoy 5 uninterrupted minutes of peace, a bitter, agonizing realization washed over her. That mother was surviving. Sarah was drowning. The empowerment of the cutoff had quietly morphed into a trap. Without a village, the entire crushing weight of domestic life collapsed onto the only 2 adults in the room. The exhaustion quickly metastasized into deep, corrosive resentment within her marriage. Every minor inconvenience became a catastrophic argument. When you have no safety net, every single stumble feels like a fatal fall. This is the dark, unspoken underbelly of the modern boundary movement. The internet experts who told Sarah to cut off her toxic family never offered to come to her house at 2 in the morning to rock a teething infant. The TikTok therapists who celebrated her fierce independence did not pay for a $3,000 a month night nurse to replace the grandmother who would have done it for free, out of pure, messy love. Sarah realized she had burned down her own house just to kill a spider. Yes, her parents were frustrating. Yes, their communication skills were lacking. But they had showed up. They were eager. They loved their granddaughter with a fierce, albeit clumsy, devotion. In her quest for a sterile, perfect parenting environment, Sarah had completely forgotten that a child does not need perfect people. A child just needs people who care. She had traded a flawed family for no family at all. The isolation was breaking her marriage, but reaching out meant admitting her healthy boundary was actually a devastating mistake. Could you ever undo a psychological nuclear strike? The answer lay in a simple, terrifying truth she had been running from since the day she walked away. We have fundamentally misunderstood what a boundary actually is. In the digital echo chamber of modern parenting, a boundary is presented as a weapon. It is a heavily fortified brick wall you build to keep difficult people out. It is a zero-tolerance policy. It is the ultimate, self-righteous punishment you inflict on those who fail to perfectly accommodate your emotional needs. But true clinical psychology tells a drastically different story. A boundary is not an exit strategy. It is not a punishment. It is an instruction manual. It is a roadmap you hand to someone you love, showing them exactly what you need in order to stay in the relationship. A wall says, "I am done with you." A boundary says, "I want you in my life, and here is how we are going to make that happen." Sarah sat on her living room floor, surrounded by piles of unwashed laundry and discarded baby toys, and finally confronted a devastating truth. She hadn't set a boundary at all. She had simply run away. Conflict resolution is agonizingly difficult. Looking your mother in the eye and saying, "I need you to stop making comments about my parenting because it hurts me," requires immense vulnerability. It requires the courage to sit in the heavy, deeply uncomfortable silence that follows. It requires you to act like a grounded adult, speaking to another adult, rather than a wounded teenager rebelling against authority. Social media had offered her a trapdoor out of that discomfort. By branding her parents as toxic and swiftly cutting them off, she didn't have to be vulnerable. She didn't have to face the terrifying prospect that her parents might get defensive, or that she might have to stubbornly hold her ground through a series of messy, imperfect conversations. She had taken the coward's way out. But because she wrapped it in the noble, unimpeachable language of mental health and self-care, no one questioned it. Not even her. She realized that true peace does not come from eliminating all friction. True peace comes from building the emotional resilience to navigate that friction. By refusing to tolerate a few awkward conversations, she had accidentally engineered a life of maximum suffering. She had successfully protected her daughter from a harmless, unwanted opinion about sleep training, but she had sentenced her to a childhood without grandparents. The guilt was suffocating. She had weaponized the very vocabulary of healing to inflict profound, lasting pain on the people who had given her life. You cannot simply cancel your family like a faulty subscription service. Her parents weren't villains in a psychological thriller. They were just messy, opinionated, deeply loving people who had absolutely no idea how to navigate this new stage of life. And she had never even given them the chance to learn. The internet had lied to her. A boundary wasn't a brick wall, it was a bridge with a tollgate. Now, she just had to figure out how to rebuild that bridge back to the very people she had publicly branded as toxic. But when she finally picked up the phone to dial her mother's number, the response she got was the one thing no TikTok therapist could have prepared her for. The phone rang once. Twice. 3 times. Every ring echoed in the hollow silence of her living room. When the click finally came, Sarah braced herself for the defensive anger she was certain she deserved. She braced for the guilt trip, the yelling, the righteous indignation of a mother scorned. Instead, all she heard was a fragile, trembling exhale. "Sarah? Are you okay? Is the baby okay?" There was no malice. There was no toxicity. There was only the raw, desperate relief of a mother who had been holding her breath for 4 agonizing months. In that fractured, tearful conversation, Sarah did not find a narcissist or an emotional abuser. She found a deeply terrified, imperfect woman who just wanted her daughter back. Reconciliation is not a cinematic montage of tearful hugs and immediate understanding. It is spectacularly, painfully awkward. It requires swallowing your pride and admitting that your airtight psychological diagnosis was actually just a manifestation of your own exhaustion. When her parents finally walked back into her home, the air was thick with hesitation. They tiptoed around her, terrified of stepping on a hidden emotional landmine that would trigger another 4-month exile. Sarah had to do the grueling, unglamorous work of dismantling the wall brick by brick. She had to replace the weapon of estrangement with the actual tool of boundary setting. The next time her mother made an offhand comment about the baby's sleep schedule, Sarah didn't freeze. She didn't retreat to her phone to diagnose her mother's personality disorder. She took a deep breath, looked her mother in the eye, and did the hardest thing in the world. She communicated. "Mom, I know you are trying to help, and I love that you care so much. But when you criticize how I handle her naps, it makes me feel like you don't trust me as a mother. I need you to trust me, or we can't talk about sleep training anymore." The response was not perfect. Her mother got slightly defensive. There was a tense, uncomfortable silence that stretched across the kitchen island. But then, the bridge held. Her mother sighed, nodded, and apologized. The tension broke. The world did not end. This is the new framework for modern parents. You do not have to choose between total submission to your family's outdated rules and absolute, crushing isolation. You can hold firm, healthy lines while keeping the village intact. You can enforce a toll gate on the bridge without blowing up the bridge itself. It requires a radical shift in perspective. You have to accept that your village will never be the sterile, perfectly curated utopia promised by internet therapists. The village is loud. It is opinionated. It will occasionally feed your toddler a piece of chocolate right before dinner, and it will buy noisy, obnoxious plastic toys that disrupt the neutral aesthetic of your living room. But that same flawed village will also rock your colicky baby for 3 hours so you can sleep. It will look at your child with a depth of irrational, all-consuming love that no hired professional could ever replicate. It will catch you when the immense weight of parenthood inevitably brings you to your knees. The village is messy, it is flawed, and it will constantly test your patience. But as you look at your own child, and then at the family that surrounds them, you have to ask yourself a deeply uncomfortable question: are you building boundaries to protect your peace, or are you just building walls to avoid the hard work of love?